It began with a scream that still echoed in his mind, a raw, jagged cry that shattered the silence of an ordinary autumn afternoon. I remember that moment as if it were carved into my soul, the piercing sound of a dog barking desperately, the frantic pounding of my heart, and the rustling of dry cornstalks underfoot as I dashed outside. I never thought that one day, in the gentle decay of fall, my life would twist into a nightmare of confusion and quiet dread. I had always believed in the simple rhythms of daily life. My routine was predictable: sunrise coffee on the porch, a slow walk through the small town, evenings filled with laughter and the comforting company of my dog, Charlie, a scrappy mutt with soulful eyes and a tail that wagged like a metronome of happiness. But that day, everything unraveled in a heartbeat. In the golden light of late afternoon, I watched in horror as Charlie bolted towards the towering cornfield at the edge of our property, as if pulled by an unseen force. At first, I assumed he was just chasing a squirrel or responding to the call of nature. But as I ran after him, the field's imposing maze of green began to swallow him whole. The cornstalks rustled with a sinister whisper as I pushed through, my breath quickening with every step. I called his name over and over, the sound of my voice trembling in the wind, yet there was no answer, only the eerie silence of that vast, unyielding field. Inside the cornfield, time seemed to warp. The tall, dense stalks formed a labyrinth that muted every sound except my own frantic heartbeat. I searched every row, my hands brushing against rough leaves and tangled vines, but there was no sign of Charlie. Panic took hold as I realized that my beloved companion had vanished into an expanse that felt suddenly endless and unknowable. The cornfield, once a benign backdrop to lazy summer afternoons, had become a vortex of terror and uncertainty. I returned home drenched in sweat and disbelief. The sun had begun its descent, casting long, accusing shadows over the familiar porch and yard, as if nature itself were mourning the disappearance. I made frantic calls to neighbors and local friends, but all I received were uneasy glances and quiet murmurs of concern. The once friendly, untroubled town now felt cloaked in a heavy, unspoken dread. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, the image of Charlie's wide, searching eyes haunting every thought. In my dreams, I saw him wandering through endless rows of corn, his form blurring into a ghostly silhouette. I awoke with a start, convinced that the cornfield was no longer just a patch of earth. It had become a threshold to something unrecognizable, a chasm between the normal and the uncanny. The next morning, with a resolute heart and trembling hands, I set out once again towards the field. Determined to reclaim what I had lost, I walked the perimeter, calling his name into the rustling wind. The field offered no answers, only the rustling of corn and a lingering sense of foreboding. Every step I took was accompanied by an unsettling mix of hope and despair. I recalled how Charlie had once trotted happily at my side, his fur shining in the morning light. Now, there was only the bitter absence of his warmth. I decided to enlist the help of a local farmhand, a quiet man named Roy who had worked the fields for decades. Roy's eyes narrowed as he listened to my frantic account. Sometimes, he said in a low, gravelly tone, the cornfield takes what it wants. But it gives nothing back. His words sent a shiver down my spine. The notion was absurd, yet there was an undeniable gravity in his tone that made me question every rational explanation. Even if I dismissed his remark as superstitious rambling, a deep, unsettling doubt crept into my mind. We combed through the field together, our search marked by the stark contrast between the simple act of walking through familiar territory and the unnerving feeling that something was profoundly off. Roy moved slowly, his practiced eyes scanning the rows with a kind of resigned determination. I followed close behind, my heart hammering with every step, the echoes of that first scream still lingering in the recesses of my mind. After hours of fruitless searching, we reached a clearing at the far end of the field, a small, barren patch where the corn had been cleared long ago. The clearing felt like the epicenter of an inexplicable disturbance. The earth here was bare and cracked, and the silence was so profound it pressed against my eardrums. It was here, in that desolate space, that I first noticed something utterly out of place, a single, mud-spattered collar lying on the ground, its tag glinting dully in the weak light. I picked it up with trembling fingers, the leather cold and unyielding in my grasp. For a split second, I wondered if this was a cruel joke, a trick of my fraying nerves. But deep down, I knew that this was not a mere accident. Charlie had always worn his collar, a simple band with no adornments, yet now it lay abandoned as if cast aside by fate. The collar was scratched, its surface marred by what looked like desperate claw marks. My thoughts raced wildly. Had he been injured? Or was there something far more disturbing at play? Returning home with the collar clutched tightly in my hand, I was overcome by a numbing dread. The familiar comfort of my living room, with its worn armchair and the lingering aroma of fresh coffee, now felt alien and threatening. Every shadow in the corners of the room seemed to harbor secrets, every creak of the floorboards whispered untold horrors. I tried to convince myself that it was simply the stress of the day playing tricks on my mind, yet the weight of the collar and the unanswered questions it carried made it impossible to dismiss. Over the next few days, life took on an agonizing rhythm of waiting and worrying. I kept revisiting the cornfield, each time with renewed hope and mounting despair. Neighbors whispered of strange occurrences in the fields, an inexplicable silence that fell over the rows at dusk, an uncharacteristic stillness that blanketed the area like a shroud. It was as if the land itself was mourning the loss of something essential, something that had been taken away and replaced with an unsettling void. I began to notice changes in myself as well. The person who once greeted each day with a quiet optimism had grown withdrawn and jumpy. The lines on my face deepened with worry, and my eyes, once bright with life, now darted nervously at every unfamiliar sound. Every creak and rustle outside my window sent my pulse racing, and I found myself constantly checking the door, half expecting to see Charlie, tail wagging, emerging from the twilight. Then came the day when hope was momentarily restored. Late in the afternoon, as I sat on the worn porch steps staring out into the cornfield with a mix of dread and longing, I heard a rustling, soft at first, then increasingly insistent. My heart pounded in my chest as I rose to investigate, every step feeling like a march towards an uncertain destiny. I approached the field with a cautious optimism, the fading light painting long, eerie shadows across the ground. There, at the edge of the cornfield, I glimpsed a figure. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a mere distortion among the stalks. But as I drew closer, the figure became unmistakable. It was Charlie, or what I hoped was Charlie. His body was low to the ground, moving in a slow, measured way that was both familiar and hauntingly alien. His eyes, normally warm and inviting, now held an intense, almost unsettling stare that seemed to pierce through the encroaching darkness. I reached out, calling his name with a trembling voice that betrayed both relief and an inexplicable fear. For a moment, time froze. Charlie's head cocked slightly, and his eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite name, a blend of recognition and an otherworldly detachment. I extended my hand, and he hesitated before stepping forward. The connection we once shared was there, but something was irrevocably changed. His movements were tentative, as if he were relearning the language of companionship. The gentle, bounding energy he once exuded had been replaced by a subdued, almost ghost-like quality. The encounter was over as quickly as it had begun. Without a word or a final glance, Charlie turned and retreated back into the depths of the cornfield, leaving me standing in a swirl of conflicting emotions, relief, dread, and an overwhelming sense of loss. That night, I sat in the darkness, the image of his transformed eyes seared into my memory. I understood, in that excruciating moment, that the world I thought I knew had shifted irrevocably. The mundane had morphed into something strange and unaccountable, leaving behind a void filled with unanswered questions and lingering terror. In the days that followed, I struggled to come to terms with what I had witnessed. Every time I ventured near the cornfield, a chill would crawl up my spine, and the echoes of that fateful encounter would replay in my mind. Friends tried to console me with rational explanations, a misinterpreted reaction to the stress, a momentary lapse in judgment, but no words could fully capture the disquiet that had taken root in me. The simple act of caring for a pet had transformed into a relentless quest for understanding, a desperate need to reclaim a fragment of normalcy that had been shattered. The small town, with its quiet streets and familiar faces, seemed to be complicit in my isolation. Conversations with neighbors grew sparse, their eyes betraying a mixture of pity and a silent warning not to delve too deeply into mysteries that were better left unexplored. I began to wonder if the cornfield, with its imposing rows and whispered secrets, had always harbored something dark beneath its surface, a hidden truth that only revealed itself when one dared to cross its boundary. As the days bled into one another, the weight of the mystery pressed down on me. I kept the collar on my bedside table as a grim reminder of what I had lost and what might yet be reclaimed. I spent countless hours poring over old photographs of Charlie, trying to reconcile the joyful, vibrant creature of the past with the haunting spectre I had encountered. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world was still shrouded in darkness, I found myself asking questions that had no answers, questions about change, loss, and the fragile boundary between the ordinary and the inexplicable. And so, with each passing day, the cornfield loomed larger in my thoughts, a silent sentinel guarding secrets I was desperate to uncover. The story of that autumn, of a dog who vanished and returned altered, had become an inescapable part of my life, a painful, persistent reminder that sometimes the most unassuming corners of our world hide the deepest, most unsettling mysteries. That night, sleep continued to evade me. Every minute dragged by as if I were suspended in a realm between waking terror and a restless, half-remembered nightmare. The encounter with Charlie, this altered, ghost-like echo of the dog I once knew, haunted my every thought. In the dim glow of the midnight lamp, I sat alone in my small living room, the once familiar surroundings now tainted by an intangible sense of foreboding. I resolved to return to the cornfield the following morning. With the collar clutched tightly in my hand like a talisman against the unknown, I set out before dawn, determined to confront the source of my growing dread. The cool, dewy air carried an almost palpable tension as I approached the field, each step filled with both trepidation and an inexplicable drive for answers. As I neared the edge of the field again, the towering corn stalks loomed like silent sentinels guarding their dark secret. I remember the clearing where I had found the mud-spattered collar, a barren patch that seemed to pulse with the echoes of lost time. I retraced my steps to that place, hoping that perhaps there would be more clues left behind. The ground was still marked by the impressions of my hurried passage, and the corn whispered softly, as if sharing secrets among themselves. I knelt down by the clearing, carefully scanning the ground. The collar lay where I had left it, undisturbed by the morning dew. But something else caught my eye, a set of faint, muddy footprints leading from the collar toward the denser parts of the cornfield. They were too small to belong to a grown man, yet too deliberate to be the casual wanderings of a stray animal. My heart hammered as I realized that the footprints might be a silent testament to something, or someone, that had been there in the night. I followed the trail as it meandered between the rows, the soft earth absorbing the sound of my careful steps. The deeper I ventured, the more the world seemed to shift. The corn, which had once swayed lazily in the breeze, now moved with a strange, almost predatory rhythm. Every rustle of the leaves sounded like hushed voices, and every shadow seemed to stretch out as if to reach for me. The line between reality and my own overactive imagination began to blur. After what felt like an eternity of searching, I came upon a narrow path, almost hidden by the overgrowth, leading to a spot in the field that I had never seen before. There, beneath a gnarled, ancient oak that stood oddly solitary amid the sea of corn, lay remnants of what appeared to be an old, abandoned tool shed. Its weathered boards and rusted metal door hinted at decades of neglect. The shed was a stark contrast to the manicured, predictable nature of my small town, a relic from a bygone era, forgotten by time. The air around it seemed to vibrate with a memory of sorrow, as if the building itself mourned for what it had once contained. Inside, shafts of early sunlight pierced the dusty gloom, revealing scattered farming equipment, broken pieces of wood, and piles of old newspapers. One article, yellowed and curling at the edges, mentioned a long-forgotten tragedy, a series of inexplicable disappearances in the region decades ago. The language was blunt and unsentimental, yet it evoked a quiet horror that resonated with my own experiences. Though I was aware that history often repeats itself in small, unsettling ways, the connection between the past and the present sent shivers down my spine. I carefully sifted through the debris, half expecting to find more signs of Charlie or evidence of what had taken him. My hands trembled as I uncovered an old photograph tucked into a cracked envelope. It depicted a family standing in front of a modest farmhouse, with a dog that bore a striking resemblance to Charlie, though its eyes held a gleam of something inexplicable, almost as if they, too, had seen horrors beyond human comprehension. The photograph, with its faded colors and blurred edges, seemed to whisper of secrets that were never meant to resurface. Leaving the shed with a heavy heart and more questions than answers, I made my way back to the edge of the cornfield. The footprints had ended abruptly near a thick clump of corn that appeared unnaturally denser than the rest. I paused there, squinting into the sunlit green mass, trying to discern any sign of movement or a hidden entrance. It was as if the corn itself had grown to form a living barrier, an organic wall that shielded something from the prying eyes of the world. A sudden noise, a snap of a dry stalk underfoot, made me jump. I froze, every nerve on edge, listening intently for any hint of further movement. The silence that followed was oppressive, filling the space with an almost tangible anxiety. I realized that the cornfield, once a simple, unremarkable part of the landscape, had transformed into a labyrinth of secrets and veiled threats. I was intruding on its hidden domain, and every instinct screamed at me to retreat, yet the need for answers pushed me forward. The sun climbed higher, and the oppressive chill of early morning gave way to a simmering heat. I decided to return home and contact Roy again. When I recounted my discoveries, the footprints, the hidden shed, the unsettling photograph, Roy's face darkened with a mixture of concern and resignation. He listened in silence, his eyes narrowing as if he were weighing the gravity of my words against his own buried memories. "That field has always had its own way of keeping secrets," Roy finally said, his voice low and measured. "I remember when I was a young man, there were rumors, whispers among the old-timers, that something had been lost in those rows long ago. They said that once you crossed a certain line, the world you knew would never be the same. But you never think it applies to you until you're standing there, feeling the weight of those old stories pressing in on you." His words, tinged with the wisdom of someone who had seen much and believed little in simple explanations, added another layer of dread to my own fears. Roy offered to accompany me back to the field that afternoon, and we agreed to return together, both driven by the shared need to understand what lay beneath the surface of our ordinary lives. With the collar and the photograph as silent witnesses to our shared unease, we embarked on our journey back to that enigmatic clump of corn. The return trip was a study in contrasts. The familiar landscape of our small town, its whitewashed houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and friendly neighbors, seemed to mock the unease festering in my heart. Every smile, every nod, felt like a fragile mask hiding the collective uncertainty that we all, deep down, were unwilling to speak about. The cornfield, however, loomed like a dark sentinel at the town's edge, its presence a constant reminder that even the most ordinary settings could harbor the extraordinary and the inexplicable. When we reached the clump of unusually dense corn, Roy motioned for silence. The air was thick with expectation, and every creak of the old boards under our feet echoed with an unspoken warning. Together, we began to clear away the fallen leaves and debris that obscured a narrow opening between the stalks. The gap was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, a portal to the heart of the mystery. Inside, the corn formed a tight corridor, its stalks intertwining in a way that defied natural growth. The light dimmed progressively, swallowed by the dense foliage until it was all but gone. Roy's hand rested on my shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity as we pressed forward. My thoughts raced, was this some natural phenomenon, or was there something more sinister at work? Deep within the corridor, we discovered a small clearing, barely perceptible even in the scant light. The ground here was different, compacted, almost as if it had been deliberately trodden upon. In the center of the clearing lay a small pile of objects, an old, rusted key, a broken chain link, and what appeared to be a torn scrap of fabric that might have once been part of a dog's leash. Each item was a fragment of a puzzle that refused to reveal its complete picture. The key, in particular, glinted dully in the low light, its intricate design hinting at a purpose that was far removed from anything mundane. Roy picked up the key gingerly, his eyes narrowing as he examined it. "This wasn't left by chance," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's as if someone, or something, wanted it to be found." I nodded silently, the chill of that thought mingling with the heat of the afternoon. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cornfield was more than a mere expanse of crops. It was a repository of memories and secrets, a living archive of the past and the inexplicable present. As we lingered in the clearing, a sense of foreboding settled over us like a thick fog. The silence was punctuated by the distant hum of everyday life, a car passing on a far-off road, the occasional murmur of voices from the town. But here, in this isolated pocket, time felt suspended. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands, and let the weight of the key sink in. It was a symbol of passage, of access to places that were not meant to be explored by the ordinary man. Leaving the clearing, we retraced our steps back through the maze of corn. The journey out was no less unnerving than the way in. Every rustle of the leaves and every flicker of shadow seemed to chase us as we made our way back to the edge of the field. When we finally emerged into the open, the bright daylight felt almost like a balm, a temporary reprieve from the oppressive, secretive world of the corn. Back in town, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The key, now safely tucked away in my coat pocket, seemed to pulse with a quiet, insistent energy, as if urging me to return to that hidden realm. Conversations with neighbors grew increasingly strained, their once friendly greetings now laced with subtle glances of warning. It was as though everyone sensed that something had shifted, a ripple in the fabric of our shared reality. That evening, alone in my modest kitchen, I spread the items out on the table, the collar, the torn fabric, and the mysterious key. Each item told a fragment of a story, a narrative that stretched back decades and intertwined with the present in ways that defied simple explanation. I sat in silence for what felt like hours, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of an old clock on the wall, a metronome counting down to an inevitable reckoning. A nagging thought tugged at my mind. Was it possible that the transformation in Charlie was just a small part of a much larger, darker tapestry woven into the very land we lived on? I recalled Roy's grave words about the field's history, the hushed legends passed down through generations. In the stark light of that recollection, I began to wonder if the cornfield had once been a place of sorrow, of lost hopes and hidden sins, a repository for memories too painful or dangerous to face in the light of day. The key, with its intricate details and mysterious origins, seemed to beckon me to uncover those long-buried truths. Yet, the more I probed, the more I felt the insidious pull of an ancient, unspoken power, a force that thrived in the hidden corners of our ordinary world. The once comforting familiarity of my home now felt like a fragile veneer, concealing a reality that was as unpredictable as it was unsettling. As I sat there, the last vestiges of daylight giving way to the cool embrace of night, I made a silent vow. I would follow the threads of this mystery wherever they led, no matter how deep into the unknown I had to venture. The memory of Charlie's altered eyes, the eerie silence of the clearing, and the weight of the key all formed a mosaic of unanswered questions. And though each piece was shrouded in uncertainty, together they hinted at a truth that demanded to be uncovered. In that moment, as the night deepened and the ordinary world outside my window settled into a quiet, deceptive calm, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The cornfield was no longer just a field, it was a threshold between the familiar and the unfathomable, a silent witness to the hidden scars of our past and the unsettling promise of an uncertain future. With the resolve of someone who has tasted the bitter draught of inexplicable loss, I prepared myself for the next step of this journey. I knew that the answers I sought lay somewhere beyond the tangible, buried in the depths of that living maze. And so, as I closed the door to my quiet home and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt an undeniable pull, a summons to return to the cornfield and confront the mysteries it guarded. In the darkness, the world seemed to hold its breath, and I, too, became part of that silent anticipation. The key in my pocket, the weight of the memories in my heart, and the lingering question of what had become of my loyal friend, these were the companions that would guide me forward. Even as fear and uncertainty wove themselves into the fabric of my thoughts, I could not help but feel that the next chapter of this story would force me to confront not only the secrets of the field but also the deepest, most hidden parts of myself. And so, with a heart both heavy and resolute, I stepped back towards the cornfield, its dark silhouette a constant reminder that sometimes the most unsettling truths lie just beyond the veil of the ordinary. I returned to the cornfield under a sky heavy with unsettled clouds, as if the heavens themselves harbored the secrets of that strange day. Every step forward was a reluctant surrender to fate, a measured crossing into an uncertain domain where each rustle of the corn whispered promises of revelations and betrayals alike. The key, still warm against the chill in my pocket, pulsed with a quiet urgency that made my heart pound in tandem with the sound of my tentative footsteps. Navigating deeper into the maze-like rows, I recalled Roy's somber warning about crossing invisible thresholds, about the irreversible changes that the field was rumored to unleash. With each careful stride, the familiar world of my small town began to dissolve, replaced by a realm where light was devoured by the dense canopy of corn, leaving behind only muted grays and shifting shadows. The air grew heavy with moisture, and the scent of earth, a pungent aroma that carried with it echoes of long-forgotten memories. A narrow passage, barely noticeable among the towering stalks, beckoned me onward. I squeezed through, feeling the coarse leaves brush against my arms, as though the field itself sought to mark me as an interloper. The atmosphere was charged with a tension that bordered on palpable. It was as if every grain of soil, every fragment of decaying husk, was silently holding its breath. I could almost hear the muted thumping of a heartbeat, not my own, but one that belonged to the field, an ancient pulse that echoed through the corridors of time. In the midst of this verdant labyrinth, I found myself drawn to a cluster of corn that formed a natural archway, its leaves interlaced in a way that created a doorway to an open space I had never seen before. Beyond that portal, the field seemed to open into a forgotten courtyard where nature and neglect coexisted in uneasy harmony. In the center of this hidden sanctuary lay an old wooden bench, its surface weathered by countless seasons, as if it had witnessed generations of sorrow and hope. The sight of it sent a shiver down my spine, a reminder that even in isolation, relics of the past can serve as silent witnesses to the unfolding present. I approached the bench slowly, each footstep accompanied by the creak of ancient wood and the whisper of unseen presences. There, on the bench, was a small leather-bound journal. The cover was embossed with faint, intricate patterns that time had nearly erased, and a lock, a tiny, rusted one, secured its secrets. My pulse quickened as I realized that this journal might be the missing piece of the puzzle, a tangible link to the inexplicable events that had disrupted the familiar cadence of my life. With trembling hands, I examined the lock. The key from the clearing, with its odd, archaic design, seemed destined for this moment. I inserted it into the lock, my fingers gripping it tightly as I turned it slowly. There was a click, a sound that reverberated in the stillness, as if it signified the opening of a long-sealed vault of memories. The cover creaked open, revealing pages yellowed by time and scrawled with hurried, desperate writing. The words were written in a neat, precise hand, and though the ink had faded, the emotions behind them leaped off the page with startling clarity. The journal told the story of a man much like myself, a resident of this very town who had once owned a dog that was the center of his small, comfortable world. The entries were filled with ordinary observations, gentle reflections on daily routines, and, gradually, an increasing sense of unease. As the pages turned, the tone shifted, mundane notes about the weather and local happenings gave way to descriptions of strange occurrences near the cornfield. The writer recounted nights filled with eerie sounds and inexplicable lights, a creeping feeling of being watched, and, most disturbingly, the gradual disappearance of his faithful companion. Each entry was a piece of a mosaic that mirrored my own recent experiences, and yet there was an undercurrent of terror that grew with every word, a terror that seemed to be rooted not in fantasy, but in a reality as stark and unforgiving as the furrows in the field. My eyes lingered on one entry in particular, dated over 40 years ago. The writer described a moment when, like me, he had followed his dog into the cornfield after a desperate bark. His narrative was raw, laden with the shock of watching a familiar face slowly transform into something unrecognizable. The dog, once full of life and unwavering loyalty, had returned with a distant, haunted look, as if the very essence of its being had been siphoned away by the field. The account ended with a chilling admission that the man had felt an irreversible change in his own soul, as though the field had not only taken his beloved pet, but had left behind a lingering stain on his heart. Closing the journal, I sat on the bench for a long moment, the weight of the written words settling into the pit of my stomach. Outside, the wind began to pick up, its mournful song stirring the corn in a ghostly dance. Every sound was amplified in that enclosed courtyard, the rustling leaves, the distant creak of an old structure, even the soft scuff of my own shoes against the hardened earth. The boundary between the past and the present, once so clearly defined, now seemed to blur into a single, continuous thread of melancholy and forewarning. Rising from the bench, I resolved to explore further, to uncover every scrap of evidence that might explain the unnatural shift in Charlie and the field's mysterious hold over our lives. The journal had hinted at a network of hidden places, forgotten paths, secluded clearings, and even a series of underground cellars that lay beneath an abandoned farmhouse at the far edge of the property. Though I had never ventured so far before, a newfound determination pushed me forward. I needed to know if these clues were isolated anomalies or part of a larger, unsettling tapestry that wove through the very fabric of our small town. Leaving the sanctuary of the courtyard behind, I retraced my steps through the maze of corn. The afternoon light began to wane, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. Shadows lengthened, and the air grew cool, as if the day itself were reluctant to let go of its secrets. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision, a flash of fur, a fleeting silhouette, and each time my heart lurched with both hope and trepidation. The line between rescue and loss, between the familiar and the profoundly altered, became increasingly blurred with every step I took. As I pressed on, the field began to change once more. The corn thinned out and the ground took on an uneven, almost haphazard quality, as though it had been trodden by many desperate feet over the years. In the distance, I made out the outline of a dilapidated farmhouse, its windows dark and its walls scarred by time and neglect. The sight of it stirred something deep within me, a mixture of curiosity and an inexplicable dread, as if the structure itself were a repository of all the silent horrors that had passed through this land. Drawing nearer, I noticed that the path to the farmhouse was flanked by wild, overgrown vegetation and scattered remnants of old tools and forgotten trinkets. It was a place where nature and decay danced in an uneasy truce. I paused at the threshold, the cool breeze carrying with it the faint aroma of must and earth. There, in the quiet desolation, I felt the full force of what the journal had hinted at, that the field was not merely a backdrop to everyday life, but an active participant in a saga of loss, transformation, and irreversible change. I stepped cautiously onto the creaking porch of the farmhouse. Each step resonated in the silence, echoing off broken windows and peeling walls. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the ghosts of a bygone era. Faded photographs lined the walls, their subjects, families, pets, and smiling faces, now mere echoes of a happier time. In one corner, a shattered mirror lay strewn across the floor, its fragmented reflection distorting the room into a collage of memories and shattered realities. In the midst of this dilapidation, I discovered a small study room. There, amidst piles of yellowed newspapers and scattered letters, lay another journal, this one bound in worn, cracked leather and accompanied by a set of photographs that captured moments of quiet joy and subtle melancholy. I leafed through its pages, and my heart sank as I recognized familiar themes, accounts of ordinary days turned extraordinary by inexplicable events, moments of bliss shattered by the sudden loss of a beloved pet, and descriptions of a cornfield that seemed to harbor secrets beyond comprehension. One entry, in particular, recounted an incident that resonated with my own experiences, a dog that had wandered into the field, only to return changed, its eyes empty and its spirit diminished. The farmhouse, the journal, and the photographs formed a grim tapestry, a chronicle of lives touched and tainted by the silent, inexorable pull of the cornfield. As dusk settled, I knew I could no longer remain in that forsaken place. The haunting whispers of the past and the weight of unspoken truths urged me to return home, to gather my thoughts and brace myself for the inevitable confrontation with the mysteries that lay ahead. Stepping back into the cool embrace of the evening, I felt a profound transformation within myself. I was no longer the person who had once taken solace in the simple rhythms of life. I was now irrevocably intertwined with the dark undercurrents of this place, a reluctant witness to a narrative that defied the boundaries of the ordinary. With the journals and photographs tucked safely into my bag, I made my way back through the thinning corn, every step a reminder that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. Outside the field, the familiar outlines of the town reappeared, bathed in the soft, forgiving light of early night. Yet, even as I crossed the threshold of ordinary life, I could not shake the feeling that I had carried a piece of that haunted world with me, a silent echo of the field's hidden truths, a lingering shadow in the back of my mind. The mysterious key, the journals, and the spectral images of transformed faces were now a part of my reality, urging me to delve deeper into the enigma that had upended my life. In the quiet hours of that night, as I sat alone at my desk with the collected remnants of a troubled past spread before me, I felt both the weight of despair and the flicker of determination. The answers I sought were not easily revealed, hidden in layers of memory, regret, and inexplicable change. Yet, I knew that the journey had only just begun, and that each clue, no matter how painful, was a step toward understanding the true nature of the cornfield and its silent dominion over our lives. Even as sleep finally claimed me, I dreamt of endless rows of corn swaying under a ghostly moon, a field that seemed to whisper of forgotten promises and inevitable transformation. In that surreal landscape, the boundaries between past and present, loss and hope, joy and sorrow dissolved into a single, unyielding truth, that sometimes, the ordinary world conceals within it mysteries that change everything, leaving behind scars that time can never fully heal. In the deep silence of a moonless night, I returned once more to the cornfield, this time with a resolve tempered by despair and a desperate hope for closure. Every step toward that looming green fortress felt like a descent into a final confrontation with the ghosts of my past, a final reckoning with a mystery that had consumed my every waking thought. The journals, the key, the torn fabric and the haunting photographs had all led me here, to the threshold of an ending that I both dreaded and craved. The field, under the black sky, was a living darkness, its corn stalks bending and swaying as if moved by a force that transcended the natural. With each footfall, the soft soil seemed to whisper the memories of countless souls who had wandered these rows before me. I gripped the small key in my hand as if it were a lifeline, its cold metal a reminder of promises made and mysteries unresolved. Tonight, there could be no turning back. I moved with cautious determination through the dense thicket, guided by a faint, almost imperceptible glimmer that seemed to emanate from deep within the maze. It was as though the field itself had beckoned me to its heart, promising answers wrapped in an enigma that blurred the line between loss and transformation. Every rustle of corn, every creak of a hidden branch, resonated like a heartbeat in the stillness of the night, urging me onward. At last, I reached a part of the field where the stalks formed a near-perfect circle, enclosing a small clearing bathed in a spectral, silver light. In the center of the clearing, as if waiting for me, lay a weathered wooden crate. Its surface was marked with strange, almost indecipherable carvings, echoing the ancient language of sorrow and remembrance. The crate's presence was both ominous and magnetic, drawing me closer with an irresistible pull. Kneeling before it, I hesitated only for a fleeting moment before prying open the lid. Inside lay the scattered remnants of a lifelong past, old photographs, a tattered dog tag, and a bundle of letters tied with fraying twine. As I gently unfolded one of the letters, the words of a forgotten voice unfurled before me, each line steeped in the melancholy of loss. The letter recounted the tale of a man who had once lost his faithful companion to the very same field, a story that paralleled my own with unnerving precision. His words spoke of love, grief, and a transformation that defied the natural order, a transformation that, like mine, had left an indelible mark upon his soul. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, stirring the letters and scattering them like whispers into the night. In that fleeting moment, I sensed a presence behind me and a soft, hesitant sound that could have been mistaken for a familiar bark. I turned slowly, and there, emerging from the darkened fringe of the corn, stood Charlie. But this was no ordinary reunion. The creature before me bore the unmistakable air of someone who had been irrevocably changed. His eyes, reflecting the cold glint of distant stars, held a sorrow and a wisdom that transcended the simple loyalty of a pet. There was an ineffable depth in his gaze, a silent, profound understanding of the bittersweet truths that lay buried in the soil of our shared past. For a long, suspended moment, we regarded each other in silence, a communion of souls bound by the weight of unsaid words. In his presence, I felt the culmination of months of torment and heartache, the pain of loss intermingled with the faint hope of redemption. The transformation I had witnessed was not merely physical but spiritual, a profound alteration that seemed to carry the imprint of the Cornfield's hidden, ancient power. Then, as if summoned by my unspoken plea for closure, Charlie stepped forward. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though each step carried the weight of 100 unspoken regrets. As he neared, I could discern the familiar tilt of his head, a gesture that once signified joyous greeting but now conveyed a wistful farewell. I knelt down and extended a trembling hand, hoping to bridge the gulf that had opened between us. His fur, once soft and inviting, now seemed to shiver with the cool touch of autumn's final breath, and his eyes, those deep, soulful eyes, glowed with a sorrowful light that mirrored my own. In that charged moment, the cornfield itself seemed to exhale a long-held secret, the rustling of the stalks harmonizing with the silent language of our reunion. I felt a profound understanding seep into me, a recognition that the field had not stolen something from us but had transformed it. Charlie, as he stood there, was both the friend I had lost and a vessel of a deeper, more ancient memory. It was as if the cornfield had reclaimed him and in doing so had unlocked a part of his spirit that was as old and as sorrowful as the land itself. A cascade of emotions washed over me, relief intertwined with a poignant grief, acceptance mingled with an enduring sense of mystery. I realized then that some transformations, however harrowing, are the necessary price for the truths that lie beyond the veil of everyday life. The field, with its tangled rows and whispered legends, had not merely taken my companion, it had reshaped him, offering him a glimpse into a realm where time, memory, and loss converged. As I reached out to caress his head, the atmosphere around us shimmered with a weight of unspoken farewells. Charlie's ears twitched at my touch, and for a moment his eyes softened, betraying a spark of the vibrant soul he once was. It was a moment of fragile connection, a final embrace of a bond that had endured the ravages of transformation and the cruel inevitability of change. In that final embrace, I understood that our parting was imminent. The cornfield, with its inexorable, timeless cadence, demanded its due. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. In the process of loss, there is also the opportunity for rebirth. Charlie, in his altered state, had become a living testament to the field's enigmatic power, a reminder that sometimes the things we lose are not entirely lost, but reborn in forms that challenge our understanding of reality. With a slow, almost imperceptible nod, he turned away. Each step he took back into the endless maze of corn was a step away from the life we once shared, a life now transformed into something both painfully familiar and irrevocably changed. I watched until his figure melted into the whispering sea of stalks, the sight searing itself into my memory as an eternal farewell. Left alone in the clearing, I sank to the ground beside the crate, the scattered relics of the past now mingling with the soft earth. The letters, the photographs, and the dog tag all bore silent witness to a history of love and loss that stretched far beyond the confines of a single lifetime. The cornfield, in its inscrutable wisdom, had revealed a truth that was as devastating as it was beautiful, that every ending carries within it the seed of transformation, and every loss echoes with the promise of a new beginning. In the quiet that followed, I allowed the enormity of the moment to envelop me. I realized that I would never reclaim the Charlie of my memories, nor would I ever be the same person who had once walked these familiar paths with unburdened hope. Yet, in that profound change lay the bittersweet gift of understanding, a recognition that the fabric of life is woven with threads of both joy and sorrow, beauty and decay. The cornfield had stripped away the comforting veneer of everyday existence to reveal the raw, pulsating heart of what it means to truly live. Slowly, as the first hints of dawn began to soften the darkness, I gathered the relics from the clearing and turned to leave. With each step away from the field, I carried with me a deep, lingering sense of melancholy, tempered by a quiet acceptance of the inevitable. The transformation of my faithful friend was a scar on my soul, a mark of a night when the boundaries between the ordinary and the extraordinary dissolved into a single, haunting truth. Back in the gentle light of day, the cornfield stood silent and unyielding, its secrets once again hidden beneath its swaying stalks. I knew that I would forever be drawn back to that place, haunted by its mysteries and comforted by its silent assurances that every ending is, in some ineffable way, a beginning. The strange metamorphosis of Charlie was not an isolated tragedy but a chapter in a grand, relentless narrative, a story that intertwined the fate of a small town, a loyal companion, and a land steeped in forgotten sorrow. As I resumed my daily life, the echoes of that final night reverberated through my thoughts, a constant reminder of the delicate balance between loss and renewal. I could still hear the soft rustle of the corn, like a whispered lullaby of bygone days, and see the spectral glow of Charlie's eyes in the quiet corners of my memory. And though my heart ached with the profound weight of what had transpired, I embraced the truth that, sometimes, the most unyielding forces of nature serve to transform us in ways we never imagined, teaching us that the pain of loss is inseparable from the beauty of what remains. In the end, the cornfield was not the villain of our tale, nor was it a mere setting for a series of inexplicable events. It was a silent, indifferent witness to the ephemeral nature of life, a keeper of secrets that bridged the realms of the tangible and the intangible. And as I moved forward, forever changed by the experience, I carried within me the bittersweet legacy of a night when love, loss, and transformation converged in a field of endless green, leaving behind a truth that was both haunting and, ultimately, redemptive. Standing on the threshold of that lingering memory, I understood that though I had lost the dog I once knew, I had also been granted an unexpected, painful clarity. It was a reminder that life, with all its unpredictable twists and irreversible changes, is a journey of embracing impermanence, finding beauty in the transient and meaning in the shadows. The cornfield had taken much from me, yet it had also given me a new way to see the world, a way in which every rustle, every sigh of the wind, and every falling leaf carried the weight of a story that would live on, whispered in the silent language of the earth. As the sun finally broke through the lingering fog of dawn, I walked away from the field with a heart both heavy and hopeful. I had faced the enigmatic truth hidden within its rose, witnessed the metamorphosis of a cherished friend, and come to understand that even in the face of overwhelming loss, life endures, forever changed, yet infinitely beautiful. And so, with the memories of that fateful night etched into my very being, I stepped forward into a new day, carrying with me the haunting, indelible mark of a mystery that would forever be part of who I was.